Hello and welcome back to another Unity tutorial. In this video I will show you a loading screen I created, and with this loading screen we will not only be able to transition between scenes but also show it while loading some data. So as you can see, by pressing some keys we can load the scenes as well as loading some dummy data in this case. And this system is very extensible to the point where you can also just wait for key presses, like here, starting a new game, loading data, and then we have to press space to start. And as you can see, if I press any other key, nothing happens. I have to press space. I can then load another level. Then again, I have to press space and so on. So let's get started. So here we are in the project, and what I've done is just set up a few things. First we have our management scene and 3 levels, so level 1, 2, and 3. Our management scene contains a ground that will be shared across all of our levels, and we have a canvas. This is just for displaying some key presses I will do later on. As you can see, you can then see which keys I'm pressing. And we have a camera which is responsible for drawing our loading screen. So we have a clear flags of solid color and a culling mask UI, and our depth is set lower than our level camera depth. And this is because we have clear flags set to solid color, and if we were to change that above our level cameras, which is in this case -1, this will clear the screen with our background color here. And we of course don't want this to happen, so we will leave that at -10. We can then start by creating a new scene for our loading screen. We can remove the camera and the directional light and create a canvas. We don't need the event system because I will not be using any input of the UI. Then change the UI scale mode to scale with screen size and add a image as a background to our canvas. And I will also add a canvas group, and this will just be for controlling the fade in and fade out of our loading screen. We then add a empty game object to our background and call it loading display. This will need a vertical layout group. And then we add 2 TextMesh Pro components or objects, one for the progress display and one for our info display. They should stretch with our parent loading display, so set control child size width enabled and the child alignment to middle center. We can then align our loading display to the lower right corner and change the width to 600 and the height to 120, and also adjust our X and Y position. And we want our text to be to the right horizontally and vertically aligned at the center. We can now create a script for our loading screen. So I'll create a script loading screen. And of course, we need some references to our objects. So first we have a canvas group. And then we have our text. Private text mesh pro GUI. And this will need the using TM Pro at the top here. First our text progress, and then our text info. We of course want to update our text from time to time, so public void update progress and public void update info. Now, of course, our info will just display some info, some string. So this will need a string parameter. And our progress will either need a float or an integer. So we can overload this method and change it to int. Now for the float, we just want to call the int version of this method. And we want to change it to ceil to int progress. One problem with this is that our progress will be between 0 and 1, and this therefore will change this progress to either 0 or 1. But we of course want to show a percentage between 0 and 100, so we have to multiply that by 100. And there's one other case we have to take care of, and that's if our text is or if our progress is below 0. Whoops. Especially if it is between -1 and 0, we just want to set it to a way smaller value. So if progress is less than 0, we want to set progress to -10. And I will show you later on why we need that. Now in here, we want to check if our text progress is referenced, and if it is not, we just return. Then if we know we have a reference, we first check if our text progress is greater or equal to 0. Not our text progress, but our progress actually. Then we want to set our text progress.text equal to an interpolated string. Like so. And show our progress with a minimum of 2 digits. And if our progress is below 0, we want to just display loading without any numbers. Now for our update info, we first again want to check if we have a reference and return if we do not. Otherwise, we want to set our text display to info. We can test that now in awake by first calling update info, passing in a string like not loading anything, and then update progress of, let's say, 0.5. for 1 or for 2. We can then create a empty object, loading screen handler, and add our script to it. We then set up our references and enter play mode. And yep, there we go. We have 42% loading, not loading anything. Now the reason we needed this check here is because if we were to have a value like minus 0.002, this will now just display loading like we would want it to be. But if we comment that out and enter play mode again, we can see it just displays 0% loading. And we, of course, for negative values, just want to display loading. Now we can add our scene loader. So create a new script, call it scene loader. And this will just be a static class, so we can remove the mono behavior part. We will also add a using on top here, using Unity engine dot scene management. And then we will add a few methods. So public static void load area or load level with the level name, as well as a public static void unload all scenes except. And this will just have a params string array scenes. In our load level, we want to call scene manager load scene async, pass in our level name, and load it additively. So load scene mode additive. And in our unload all scenes except, we want to first get all the scenes. So for I scene manager dot scene count, we first want to check if our scene is currently looped over. So if scenes dot any, and for that we need system.link, for any scene name, if our current scene, and for that we need a reference, so scene I is equal to scene manager get scene at I. We want to check if scene I dot name is equal to scene name, or if our scene I dot name is equal to loading screen, because we definitely don't want to unload our loading screen. And if it is, we want to add it to a list that we have to create first. So list of async operation scenes to unload. It's equal to a new list. And now if this current scene has a name of any scene specified in our parent string array, or its name is loading screen, we want to continue to the next. And else we want to add this to our scenes to unload. So scenes to unload, add scene manager, unload scene async, scene I. We can now test if everything is working by creating a loading screen tester script. Here we will check for some key presses, and I want to set them in the inspector if I want to. So a serialized field private key code key underscore load level underscore 01 is equal to alpha 1 by default. Then we have load level 2 and 3. And later on, we will also be loading some data. So key load data alpha 0. We then need our update and another method called check key press. We will call this method from update and first check if input dot any key down, and if no key is down, we just want to return. Now we check for our keys. So if input dot get key down, key load level 1, then we want our scene loader to load the level 1. We can then just copy these 2 lines and paste them 2 more times, and adding an else in front of the if and changing the numbers. So 0, 2 and 0, 3. Like so. Now what we want to do in this case, whenever we load a level, we first want to unload all other levels. So we want to unload everything except for our management scene. We can now open up our management scene and add our loading screen tester to a new empty object. If we now hit play, we can indeed load our levels. However, we don't have our loading screen. So of course, we need a way to show our loading screen. So public void show loading screen, and we want to be able to remove it. Public static void and public static void remove loading screen. So in here we have scene loader, not scene loader, but scene manager, load scene async loading screen. And as we'll be using this loading screen string quite a few more times, we will just add a public static string scene name loading screen at the top here and set it to read only. And this will be loading screen. This way we can just reference our CNAME loading screen. Like so. And for removing our loading screen, we want to call scene manager unload scene async CNAME loading screen. We can now load our loading screen. Scene loader, show loading screen, like so. And for some reason it shows right away. If I press, oh, of course, any key down, this will then show. So our loading screen will be shown. However, we forgot to set this to additive. But we have no way of unloading it or keeping track of our progress. For that, we will need our loading screen script. And what this script will do is add our methods that will actually be enumerators very shortly to a stack and then load them. So first we need a public static stack of iEnumerator and call it tasks and set it to a new stack of iEnumerator. Then we need a method that actually runs these iEnumerators as a coroutine. So this will be a private iEnumerator run task, and it will need a iEnumerator task. And while our task can move to the next, we want to get the current object current is equal to task.current, and then we want to yield return current. And we do that because we might have something like, oops, we might have something in here, like yield return wait for seconds or something like that. And we want this to persist. And therefore we need to yield return whatever gets returned from our task again. And if we have no more tasks, so actually first we want to check if our tasks dot try pop out iEnumerator next task. Then we want to run this task. So start coroutine, run task with our next task. And if we do not, we want to unload the loading screen. Scene loader, remove loading screen. We can then call this from inside of our awake method. But we need to reuse this part, so we can copy that and paste it inside its own method. A private void run or check for next task, and then copy that name to here and there. We should now be able to add some tasks, and our loading screen will check if it has some tasks. If it has, it will just start the coroutine, execute all the tasks, and then unload our loading screen. So we need IEnumerators. Private IEnumerator with the same name and parameters. And first we yield return unloading scenes. And let's just add CO in front of this name. So this will actually be known to be a coroutine for readability. And it needs to be static, of course. We can do the same thing for load level. So a private static IEnumerator CO underscore load level string level name. And we can copy and paste the logic of our methods to the IEnumerators, except for the unload all scenes except part of our load level. Then inside of our load level, we want our loading screen tasks push, and we want to push our CO load level with our level name. After that, we want to call unload all scenes except. And because we do that after we push our load level, because stacks are last in, first out. So if we were to put that in front, we would first load the level and then unload the level again. So make sure that unload all scenes except is after our load level. We now want to remove everything from our method of unload all scenes except, and instead call loading screen tasks dot push CO unload all scenes except our scenes. Now we need to wait until our loading is finished. So first, actually, let's add a yield return loading, and then our level name. And then we want to store our async operation of the loading. And then we want to check if our operation is done. And if it is not, we yield return operation progress. For our unload all scenes except, we will do something very similar. We will first check if any of our scenes to unload any, if any operation is not done. And if this is true, we want to yield return -1. This means we will not track the progress, we will just show loading and ... And we now should be able to test that out. And yep, there we go. Everything is working. But of course, the loading screen is way too fast. So let's add some fade in and fade out. In our loading screen script, we can add a private enumerator, loading screen fade in, and a private enumerator loading screen fade out. And one more private enumerator loading screen fade with a float for the start value and a float target value. Now in here, we first want to store the current time. So float time is equal to time dot delta time. Actually, time dot, not delta time. Where is it? Unscaled time. We then want to have a while loop. So while our time is less than, and then we want to have a value that determines the length of our fade in or fade out. So serialize field, private float fade duration, and default will be 0.2. So while time is less than fade duration, so actually our time needs to be 0 at the beginning here, and then we want to increment our time by time dot unscaled delta time, like so. We yield return null at the end here. And of course, we want some transitioning of our canvas group alpha. So canvas group dot alpha is equal to mathf dot lerp between our start value and our target value using our time divided by fade duration. And we can then call this method from anywhere in here. Let's also check if we have a canvas group. So if it is not null, we want to do that, and else we will just return out of this. So in here, we want to yield return loading screen fade starting at 0 and then up to 1. But actually this should not be a yield return, but a yield return start coroutine. And after that, we want to run the first task. So run task. Not run task, but check for next task. And for our fade out, we can just copy that and change it to 1 and then 0. And once that's finished, we can just unload our scene. So we remove our scene loader remove loading screen and change it to start coroutine loading screen fade out. And inside of our loading screen fade out, at the end, we just want to remove the loading screen. Now we should have a 0.2 second fade in and fade out. We have the fade out, but actually we don't have the fade in, it seems like. And that's because we just call check for next task immediately and not start coroutine loading screen fade in. Now we should also have our fade in working. And yep, we do. So there we go. But currently this just displays loading, not loading anything. So let's fix that. First we just inside of awake set our info to nothing and our progress to -1. And yep, that's of course much better. Now we have one problem. We can press any other key and the loading screen will still show. And that's because we are not checking if we have a task currently in the stack. And we can actually also instantiate multiple loading screens, as you can see here. And that's something to fix, that we have to fix. So let's add a public static rule to our scene loader called isLoading. And this will just return scene manager get scene by name, and the scene name will be scene name loading screen. And we return if this is a valid scene, and a scene is valid if it is currently loaded. So then first we have to check if we are loading. So if is loading, and we want to make sure we are not loading. And we want to make sure our loading screen tasks dot count is greater than 0. So we actually have something to load. And this should actually fix both of our problems. If we now press any other key, the loading screen will not show. If we press 1, it will show. And we cannot instantiate more than one loading screen. Now the last thing we can do is create some dummy data to load, so we can actually preview our text update that we didn't even implement. So inside of our loading screen, in run task, we have to update our progress and our info. For that, we need to check what type of current object we have. So if current is a string, you of course want to update the info. And this will be the current object casted as a string. Else if our current is a float, we want to update progress float of our current. And if it is an integer, of course, cast as a int. We should now have our text updating, and yep, we can see it just a moment. So now in our tester, let's add a private enumerator load dummy data. First, we want to have an integer for our dummy data size, and let's set it to 200. Then for int I up to 200, we want to yield return something, and this will be our current index divided by dummy data size. One of these need to be a float, so we actually return a float value between 0 and 1. And at the start, we will say yield return loading dummy data. This will be our info, and this will be our progress. So we can now add another else if to our check key press and check for our key load data. And what we want to do is to our loading screen, tasks, we want to push our load dummy data. And let's just add a CO in front of it. Now let's first load a scene, like the first scene. And if I now press 0, there we go, loading and loading dummy data. So we now have a working loading screen that can not only load our scenes, but also will be shown for loading data. I hope this will be useful to you. See you in the next video.